You can't turn the control of the printing presses over to the elected bodies in countries. It just doesn't work, and that's why we set up the Fed to begin with, so you'd have that independent exercise of authority and decision-making over how you print money.
Can I say, you know, I really do have enormous respect for Senator Gregg in this area. I've seen him up close in these sessions trying to deal with the crisis last fall, and he was incredibly constructive and responsible. But I don't see this as unleashing populism on the monetary system. I see this as the public's right to know when their dollars are going to private institutions. And boy, I just find it a real stretch to argue that when the taxpayers, and this is taxpayers' money, I mean, the Federal Reserve is an extension of our government. And this is taxpayer money. And it is true, some of this represents an investment. We'll get some of this money back, but some of it will be losses, and the losses will accrue to all of us as American citizens. And I
well, only through inflation, arguably. But yes, I'll accept that that's a risk that the American taxpayer takes when the Fed takes action, which is that if they take the wrong action, they end up inflating the economy. But tax dollars don't literally go from the American taxpayer into the Fed at any time. The way the Fed gets its money is it prints it.
Absolutely, but the money they're printing is our currency.
Yeah, no,
I accept your argument.
It's not technical. It's a fairly significant point, but it doesn't go to the core of your point, which I accept.
Senator Bunning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't agree more with you and less with my ranking member on this, which is not unusual. We have strong disagreements on certain things. The Federal Reserve is running amok, totally and completely right now. We had a past chairman who was given certain responsibilities, and I want to go back to the banking crisis, that was supposed to be overseeing all mortgages. Congress gave the power to the Fed to oversee not only mortgages made out of banks, but mortgages made by mortgage brokers in 1994. Now, what has happened is this current Federal Reserve chairman has seen the pitfalls that occurred to the last Federal Reserve chairman when he didn't do his homework. And so he's trying to make up the shortfalls in our financial system by printing dollars. Now, $4 trillion since last September is not a small amount of money. If you really want to know what the Fed is doing. See, that is a non-elected official that affects our monetary policy, but it affects everybody on Main Street's daily spending. Everybody. The littlest, poorest, or the wealthiest philanthropist, whoever you would like to say. The Federal Reserve's monetary policy and their ability to spend without any controls. I think this is absolutely necessary, this type of an amendment to our budget resolution, to get the Fed's attention that we have to have disclosure to the American people. If somebody accepts Fed funds and are embarrassed about accepting Fed funds, shame on them. If a bank accepts Fed funds in some type of systematic expenditure of Fed funds to help them out of troubled times. I think the American people ought to know that. And so I very much support not only the first part, but particularly the second part, where we audit. I've been trying to get the Fed audited for, I've been here 23 years, for 22 years. And there are an awful lot of people who are afraid to death of the Federal Reserve. They're afraid to even push them. But you better push them if they're spending Americans' tax dollars. And they are. Even though my ranking member said they're not spending American tax dollars, they have to do certain things before they can print the presses. They have printed the presses and printed the money without backing in the last 5 months. Now they're selling, sometimes with difficulty, selling instruments into the market to try to assist it. That's new. That's a new procedure for the Fed. And there are many new procedures that have occurred under this new Federal Reserve Chairman. And I think we ought to examine exactly what he's doing, how he's doing it, and make him accountable to the American people for his actions. Thank you.
All right. We need to move on. Senator Enzi? On this amendment?
Yeah.
Senator Alexander?
Mr. Chairman,
if you can be as brief as possible.
I will be. I'll just
go ahead.
Can any of the sponsors tell me how many banks there are in the United States and how many of those banks on a daily basis accept money from the Fed? I mean, since we're going to pass, I mean, we have 3 sponsors here.
Raises a good question. We don't know the answer. Because the Fed has not,
you know how many banks there are, I would assume.
yeah,
Everybody knows this.
8,000, I think, or something.
8,000 banks.
8,000 banks.
All right. Isn't it likely to be true that almost every one of those banks on a daily basis has some relationship with the Fed?
Well, we don't know because we don't know what the Fed's records are.
Absolutely not.
You don't know whether
State chartered banks.
You don't
very
know
seldom.
whether a bank has a discount window relationship with the Federal Reserve Board? And can you imagine what it would be like if every single bank were required to do all of those things? I mean, I was governor at a time our state had 50 bank failures because of the Butcher Bank scandal. And if the Fed had published 2 days before it closed the discount window on any of those banks, it would have had a terrific loss of funds, and it would have completely negated every effort that the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Federal Reserve Board was doing to save taxpayers' money, to save depositors' money, and to avoid a financial collapse. So I think before we would even consider such a sweeping regulation, we ought to have hearings in this committee about the scope of what we're doing and make sure we understand exactly what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman, we've had many hearings on this subject, not specifically in the Budget Committee, but in the Banking Committee and in other committees of jurisdiction. And not lately, because it hasn't been an issue, but under the Federal Reserve Act, there ought to be some accountability.
I thank the senators. Senator Enzi recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move into an easier area, I hope.
And there are an awful lot of people who are afraid to death of the Federal Reserve. They're afraid to even push them.